Hey guys, welcome to this episode of Inside the Mind podcast about athletes. Today's guest is Peter Schneider, who's a sports psychologist from Germany and currently works for FC Augsburg in the Bundesliga. We talked a bit about team culture and as well as the role of music for mental performance in athletes. Won't spoil too much of it, so roll the intro.
Yeah, so one thing that I was, interested in being on the other side of the world is what's this culture, I guess, of sports psychology in Europe and specifically Germany. Is it like really well known? Is it kind of a new and emerging field?
No, I don't think emerging is the right word. I recently actually ironically read a great paper about the illusion of sports psychology services, which was fantastic, and the author actually talks about how he's focused more in North America, but he's from Wayne State in Detroit actually, but he talks about how it's like a boutique profession and it's been emerging for the past 30, 40 years. And I kind of laughed at that. I think he did a really good job. He's very pro sports psychology. He's just kind of trying to put the reality out there. And I think in Europe, I think it depends which country you're in. It's going to really vary. But it's definitely not an emerging field. I still think it's growing. It's growing very rapidly in very different directions. But I think sports psychologists have really been around now for some years. I think you're just seeing them kind of more people with that background, for example, are getting also into like manager positions. So you have then people who have the importance of it, who would like a sports psychologist on staff, specifically in soccer, but not just there. You have a very big importance on sports psychology. I mean, in Eastern Germany and Eastern Europe, sports psychology was a big deal already. So you're talking about over 30 years ago. Now it's kind of built in to the training of all the coaches here. And then also you have specialists like myself that find positions either at clubs or either in federations or organizations all throughout the continent. So I think it's ironically, if I compare the two, because I know the American system quite well, you have in Germany, you have a lot more positions for sports psychologists. You don't really have that too often in the States, where you're working as a hired applied sports psych. You tend to then work on your own business and work with golfers or tennis players or whatever athletes it might be, or you work at a university. I think that's the big difference.
Yeah. What was kind of your motivation to becoming a sports psychologist? And I know for me personally, not that I'm a sports psychologist, but as a sports behavior therapist, playing sports my whole life and just having an interest in sports and being around different situations, I guess, that I see teammates or myself or pro athletes go through, kind of really sparked my interest in pursuing my education in it and then trying to make a career out of it. What was your motivation for getting into the field?
I was just fascinated by it. I grew up, I just like psychology. I really like social psychology in general. I played soccer myself my whole life, and I had coaches that I really just made a connection with, and I really grew tremendously as a player, and other coaches that I grew, but in a completely different fashion. I grew and in a way that I just didn't understand why it works with some coaches and not with others, and why I was, captain of some teams, but just a complete nobody in other teams. Never really made sense to me. But I've just always been a very curious person. So I kind of, little type A personality, just kind of wanted to find that out immediately. What's going on in my own brain, why people act certain ways in certain situations. But, I was on set to go into neurology and specifically look at like symptoms of specifically depression. I really like the idea of depression. I don't like the idea of depression, but I like the idea of studying and researching for depression and how sport can combat that. That's kind of what got me into the sport psych direction. Ironically, like I always had interest, but this was not where I was going. And then I found out when I was living in Bonn and doing this neurology master's, and I just said, I'm just so bored of chemical reactions and chemical chain reactions and trying to figure out how these things line up. I didn't want to learn it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I started looking around, and I found a master's program in Finland in English, and it seemed like such a cool idea. So I decided to roll the dice. I moved to this smaller town in Finland called Jyväskylä, central Finland. Really cool, hell of an experience. And things just kind of took off from there. I got an offer to do a second master's program. Like it was like a conjoint master's program where you go study for a year in Leipzig in Germany. So I went to the east side of Germany, and I did a master's there. Then kind of said, all right, I didn't really want to go didn't want to go to the States. I didn't really want to go anywhere else. I kind of liked my life there. So I ended up just continuing to go down that rabbit hole of sports psychology. And I didn't even plan on working in soccer originally, even though that was, that's my background. But it kind of just came to be. I got an offer from a club. I started working kind of worked up the ranks, and then 10 years later, here I am.
It's funny how things work out sometimes. You don't plan on it, and it's almost like the last thing that you can imagine is what actually happens. I was in a similar position too. So I started off my university studies. It was psychology and neurology. So a little bit more, biology based like you, but again, I was kind of bored with it, and I kind of shifted through some different programs as well. But it's just something about sports that for me at least, if you add sports to anything, it makes it interesting for me. So when I figured out that there was a way to combine my education and sports, it was like that light bulb moment for me of this is something I really have to do.
Yeah. It sounds like you just take the things that you like the most and put them together. It's usually not a bad idea.
Yeah. How hard of it? I mean, I'm just thinking for myself, it was interesting when you talked about moving to central Finland, because, I mean, again, I'm not too familiar with the geography of Europe, but that seems like a more of a rural place rather than an urban environment. How hard of a decision was it to leave, I guess, your home country and go to a foreign country to study your education?
I'm born and raised in Detroit, actually, and then I moved over to Germany, and that was already kind of, I kind of got that out of the way, the moving to a different country. Granted, moving to Germany, which I knew the language a bit and whatnot, that was not, it didn't seem very permanent. It was kind of just it's cool, go for a couple of years or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then the decision to go to Finland, though, you're right, was definitely a moment of, okay, am I really doing this? Don't know much about the country. I know the hockey players really well, but other than that, I don't know too much. And so I ended up going the year before I committed. A friend of mine from Finland who lived in Germany, I went to visit them, and that definitely kind of opened my eyes a bit. So growing up in Detroit, you go up to northern Michigan all the time, and it just looks like northern Michigan in my just beautiful lakes, flat land, clear water, trees everywhere. People like their space. So it's very similar to northern Michigan, and I kind of just felt like, I could do this.
Yeah.
I will say once I got there, the first night, I remember thinking I have made the biggest mistake. I don't know. I remember that very well when I got there that very first night, and I didn't have a blanket yet, and it was too late, and all the stores were closed. So I just had like sweaters wrapped around me, and I used another sweater as like a pillow. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that was the moment where you're just like, oh no.
What did I just get myself into?
No. But yeah, like I said, it went all uphill from there. And Finland, I'll just say this real quick because I know I'm rambling a bit, but Finland was, I think, for a lot of foreigners in general, and it is a challenge. It's a challenging place. The winters I thought winters in Michigan were cold and dark, and they are. But Finland's it's a different level, and it definitely hits you, and you again you fall into these kind of lulls of oof, what am I kind of doing here? But looking back, I think it is an unbelievable country with this fascinating people, really such a caring culture. I think they get a bad rap for being kind of cold and kind of cool. I just they have a different way of showing their love, and there's this thing, ironically, as saying as now I'm rambling on. The one thing that I appreciate about them the most is the quiet. They don't need to talk. They just can kind of be, and that's something as a psychologist specifically, I think you really learn to appreciate there. And I think the Finns do that very naturally, in a very, very positive way.
Yeah, I feel like that's just a whole, kind of comparing North America to Europe thing, or at least North America to Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, is just like how busy the culture is. Like in America, Canada, it's always work, 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 work. Whereas just reading about, different vacation times they get in Europe and leisure times that they get, it just seems like a lot more relaxed culture, and they kind of place more of an emphasis on the mental well-being of the people, rather than where I feel like in North America we sometimes get too caught up in the rat race, or working 10 or 12-hour days without taking the proper time off to recharge.
Oh yeah, that's I go look at my own family. There's people all over, growing up that just you see people chasing. For us, the American dream, just busting their butts to, don't take any personal days, get that bigger house, sell that house, get another big house. Of course, you're not too much younger than me, but you understand, like 2007, I get out of college, and in 2008, the housing market crashes, and you're just sitting there like, okay, there are no jobs now. Like, what am I?
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons, I think it couldn't have, for me, it couldn't have happened better, because you kind of see, I would say, the American dream a little crumble in front of your eyes, but it does wake you, and it makes you just say, all right, what am I going to do? Am I still going to stick this out here? Am I going to get into this, as you put really well, this kind of rat race? Or I just got my bachelor's, I'm going to go to Europe, I'm going to spend a year working at a university, which is what I ended up doing, and kind of make this checkpoint of what do I actually want, and then to say that year was when I realized, I'm going to do sports psychology in Finland, and Finland was again another 2 years where you do a lot of time in those saunas, a lot of alone time, and you have a lot of self-reflection time. It's a question of whether or not you use it. You can go on the internet and watch cat and dog videos all the time, but you can also do a lot of self-reflection, and I think that's the same thing with the vacation time. I don't personally think that Europeans in general, even if I take Germans, I don't think they are more reflective than Americans. They might like to think they are, but I don't think they really are that. I think this will sound pretty harsh, but they're probably better educated, and they're more aware of certain geopolitical things than I think an average American. But that's maybe just an average. But I don't think necessarily happier, and I don't think they're necessarily as still good at taking this time to reflect. Ironically, I don't know how you feel, but like culturally, it's one of those funny things where my fiance is from Lebanon, and that country is right now obviously is having a lot of unrest as well. But when you talk to the people in terms of how happy they are, it's a weird thing where they tend to simply they're not happy with how life's going on and how the government is, or a lot of other things, a lot of other issues, but they still have kind of a different perspective on life, and what is happy and what is good, and the appreciation for certain things, I think is different.
I think it comes down to people. It's hard for some people, I think, to put themselves in other people's shoes, and they think, what makes them happy should make other people happy. But really, when you're growing up in different cultures and everything, different things make you happy, and you know, you don't really know until you, I guess, experience it firsthand.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, it seems like you had quite the path to where you are now. And if I read it correctly, you're working right now with FC Augsburg. So are you working with the first team there? Are you working with the coaches, the youth academy? What's kind of your role there at the present moment?
So my role in itself is basically it's directly with the academy. So it's with academy, with coordinators here, with director, and then most of my one-on-one work is gonna be with coaches. So that's always my main shtick, if you will, is really make better coaches and you'll make better players. And so I have a very environmental focus. That's really how I like to work. It's about creating this environment in which people can grow, and a lot of it is based off of Henriksen's work. He's a very, very well-known sports psychologist, definitely in Europe. He Danish guy. He really kind of said, let's look at talent development in a different light. Let's stop looking at the individual, but let's look a lot more at where that person is being developed and what are the factors. And so that's my job. I sometimes jokingly I stole this term actually from Team Canada. So if anyone's listening to this from them, I hope they don't mind. But they have this word called the culture police, and sometimes I refer to myself as that as general, because I think it's just so well done that you have a certain culture, certain values that you want to uphold, and certain behavior. I think that's something you could probably speak a lot to, is you look for behaviors, and are the behaviors in line with the values that we have set for ourselves. And so that's a big thing that I like to do here. I've only been here for a few months, so we're still much at the beginning, but it's definitely it's a lot of fun. It's a really great thing. People here are wonderful. I'm very, very, very lucky.
Yeah. Speaking about the behaviors a bit, that's interesting, because that's something that I really focus on when I talk about things like, or I hear people talk about things like, culture or something, or feelings about athletes or something like that, or whatever kind of mental term. I always kind of put in the lens of, so how can we observe this? So if we talk about a good or bad culture, what are the specific behaviors that we can measure and keep track of that will tell us whether there is a good or a bad culture? And I think culture, you spoke to it a bit, but I think it's such an important piece to a soccer team. My personal experience playing soccer, as well as just observing pro athletes playing soccer, that I think a lot of people underestimate how much culture has an impact on the performance of the team, because you can have 11 guys that are playing really well together and have that kind of bond, like a team kind of like Leicester City in the Premier League a couple years ago, where they don't really have that top end talent like Chelsea or Manchester United or Manchester City. But I think it was the team culture that really allowed them to work as an 11-man unit and propel them to win the championship. So I really like it when people put an emphasis on culture in sporting environments, especially with soccer, because it can, for some teams really be a make it or break it kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Augsburg is definitely like that. I mean, the first team is in the Bundesliga for now for 9 years. And it's like one of these smaller clubs that just kind of always seems to find a way to stay in the league. And it comes a lot from a culture of, putting your hard hat on, blue collar. It doesn't have to look pretty, but you got to put points on the board. It's pretty much all it's about, week for week. And I think when you accept that and you appreciate that culture, like I said, I bring it back to behaviors. A lot of times people like to say culture, I think, is not measurable. It's absolutely measurable. It's measurable in the actions. It's not measurable in numbers. I think people tend to want to break it down to, okay, how many handshakes that you want to get, quantitative. I think that's always the wrong way to go. It's a qualitative thing that where you're looking at what are the outspoken values, what are the unspoken values, and I see them we could take example of something like how punctual is everybody. Is punctuality a value? You can see that if somebody shows up on time or not. If you host a meeting at any organization, and if do people show up on time? Is that a value at this club? And then if you translate it to the actual pitch, you can absolutely say, are we a defensive style team? Are we a counter team? Are we a very aggressive attacking team? You absolutely should see that in behaviors. The interesting thing is the congruency, though, between players, coaches, staff. How many people are actually behaving in the exact same way, but in a very congruent and cohesive, coherent manner.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of people, maybe they don't quite understand, at least me personally, prior to all my education and kind of getting involved in the field, is I would, look at the roster of some soccer teams, and I would see, some older guys on the roster, and I would kind of think to myself, well, why are they still there? Like, clearly they're not at the level that they once used to be. Wouldn't it be, more beneficial to the team to let them go? But then when I kind of started getting more involved in the field, like I mentioned, I started to realize that there are certain players that uphold the culture in the team, because, you can have people like yourself or myself or coaches or whatever to try and, tell them what to do and try to teach them the right ways to build up a culture. But, sometimes they have those closed door player meetings, or, it's just 11 guys on the pitch, and you really need those guys, the leaders in the locker room, kind of to take, control of the situation when somebody like us can't be there. So that was a big eye-opening experience for me, is just the role of older players or players that have more leadership qualities. And it's not necessarily the performance on the pitch that, is 100% of the equation, I guess. There is that leadership side to it.
Absolutely. I think the thing is, though, what would ask you, what would you say are the qualities, the behavioral qualities of a leader on the pitch, if we want to stick to the soccer?
Yeah, I think kind of being like a field general. So just having that leadership of dictating where the players should be, almost like kind of being the coach on the field, almost like a player manager. Of course, you still have the manager on the sideline, but I think it's important to have kind of a field general, somebody like, thinking to me as a Juventus fan, growing up watching Gianluigi Buffon playing goalkeeper, and, every free kick, he's dictating where the players should be. He's always, you see him, if the defense makes a good play, he's always, clapping and congratulating them and giving them props or something. Somebody makes a bad play, he's always, consoling them, letting them know it's okay. He was the captain of Juventus for so many years. But he is one player that I really look to, that I feel like really has those leadership qualities. And when he was the regular starting goalkeeper for Juventus, and he was out for, a game or two for injuries, and they had the backup in, you can see that it was just something just wasn't quite there. The organization of the back line wasn't quite there. And the goalkeeper, I would say, wasn't as involved, in congratulating players or giving them props, or just being a vocal leader, I guess, on the field.
Yeah. Those are these are things is of course interesting in any club, wouldn't be here, but in general, this idea of we want to educate leaders. We want to educate player leaders. We want them to have these specific qualities you spoke of taking charge. We want them to coach. We want to open their mouth. We want them to push players positively, whether they're doing well or whether they're making mistakes. That these are things that you absolutely are looking for all the time, and yet when you ask coaches, of course, and they bring it back to behavior, you say, okay, what's important to us players who are like this? Okay, what are you coaching, or how are you coaching so that these qualities are being trained? Are you coaching? Are you coaching speaking on the pitch? And it breaks back down to this. To me, it breaks down to always this kind of funny idea of, but there are certain qualities you can't train. And I always kind of laugh about that, because I say, okay, there are ones that are much easier than others, there's no doubt. But you absolutely can train. You absolutely can train communication. Communication is always one that they say, Some players just talk, some people just don't talk. And whilst I will absolutely agree with anyone, in reality, there are always going to be players who talk more than others. You know, I was, as a personal story, I was constantly talking. You can probably tell from this recording, but I was constantly talking on the pitch. I talked to my opponents, to my teammates. I talked to parents on the sideline. I talked to the referee. I talked to some guy biking by. Like I did not shut up the whole 90 minutes. And there are players that, of course, are the almost complete opposite. But I do think, in general, still, we give up too easily on traits that we think are more born or genetic or just simply too difficult to teach.
Yeah, that's the one thing that was kind of drilled into my head in my schooling is if you have any person that doesn't have some sort of skill or behavior that they're showing, really the onus shouldn't be on them to a certain extent, I guess, but the onus shouldn't be on them. The onus should be on the teacher, and that just, the person just hasn't been taught to do that yet. So if you see, in my example, a backup goalkeeper that maybe isn't as commanding on the pitch or isn't as much of a vocal leader, it shouldn't be a discussion of him kind of not doing it because he's not a good leader or something, or he's not a good vocal leader. The discussion should be that he doesn't know how to do it yet, and he hasn't been taught. Maybe he hasn't been put in enough situations to have that natural learning opportunities, or maybe somebody hasn't taken him aside and walked him through how to do it exactly, or role play it with him. Right. Again, the one thing that was really drilled in my head is if somebody's not doing something, it's more likely than not is they haven't been taught sufficiently how to do it.
Correct. Mm-hmm. I completely agree. I think it'll break down to, and anyone will tell you also, if you have your theories, and and you have your realities, and for me it's no different. So there are, of course, you can train anything, but you don't always have the time. Sometimes you need to make hard decisions and put your energy into certain, in this case, players, but into certain actions, and those are tough decisions, I think. But I think that's just that's a little bit part of the process, a little part of the sport. We're all human. There's one thing that I always say is that nobody's doing anything, or I guess a very, very small minority people are doing something on purpose to not help somebody. Like the vast majority want to help. They want to do the right thing. So just because somebody's not coaching right or somebody's not developing right, it's not because they don't want to. That's definitely the case.
Right, because everybody wants to win, and they want to get to that point, as efficiently or maybe as effectively as possible. So like you said, it's not that they don't want to. It's just it might be that they don't know how to do something to help.
And what's interesting about that point is even like some people, like, they don't know how to focus. So they're like, he's not focused. It's like, maybe he doesn't know how to focus.
Yeah. He could have gotten through his life without having to focus in some certain aspects, and then he gets to a different environment where focusing is really something that's necessary. So it's really, again, just about teaching and learning opportunities.
Yeah. It's I feel one reason that we sports psychologists have jobs now is because it's becoming more and more clear that there are things to be taught and to learn that coaches don't always have the answers for. There are certain aspects of development that they can't know everything, and that's okay. That's also something I think we're getting much better at, is accepting that people aren't perfect and they have lots of flaws. And then not even that, not flaws, they just like I said, they can't know everything. They can't be an expert in everything. And this greater acceptance is definitely something that I think is very important to the development of I guess a society, but I would just say focus and keep it a little smaller, at least in soccer.
Yeah. And that's something too that I see kind of talked about in the media for soccer players is kind of like players knowing their role, right? And knowing that there's some things that they're good at and some things that they're maybe not so good at, even after being taught how to do something. It's just some people just have that natural ability for some things over others. And I think that's such an important part of the culture, like we were talking about a bit earlier, for a soccer team, is each player knowing their role on the team. And that could be a role in the team in regards to their position on the pitch. So you might have some players that want to play a certain position, but the coach sees them in a different position, and there's that struggle. And then there's also the roles within the team. There's a leader, there's probably some jokers on the team, there's some quiet guys, there's some rowdy guys. It's really just a lot of different informal roles, I guess I would call it.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, there's very few formal roles, and there's a lot of informal roles. That's
right.
That's a great way to put it. And you have I don't say it's like you have to. It takes it takes a whole it takes a village. If you're gonna be successful, you need all those types of people. You need them to be effective. I saw a great TED talk recently, actually, on self-reflection and knowing and understanding your roles, your strengths, your weaknesses. It's something that we, not just me, but anyone, I think, in professional sport, it's something we are constantly battling, is trying to make sure that our players, our coaches as well, they have healthy self-images and self-reflection. And one of the things about this talk I saw very interesting was basically you shouldn't be asking why things are happening to you, why I'm not playing or why I'm not getting chosen, but what did I do to not get chosen, or how did the last few weeks go? And this word "what" specifically is very powerful, because it takes away a lot of the emotional part of it, kind of shuts off your amygdala more and activates more the logical part of, okay, let's just look at how to, we're association machines anyway, our brains, but why don't we just focus then instead on what happened before, and try to look at more of as best we can, try to look at the logical, what's the word, logical sequence. This happened and this happened and this happened.
Yeah.
That's a tall order for any human being, and myself very much included. And I like to talk about it, but I'm quite emotional guy myself. So I could sit here and say it, but I know exactly how difficult that can be.
For sure. One last thing that I wanted to touch on. One sec. Sorry. One last thing that I wanted to touch on before I let you go. I know you had done a couple posts, or at least one post that I saw, on the role of music and regulation of arousal for athletes. I think it was in training and in practice. And that's something that, I see so often just with me and my friends and pro athletes. Even you see them all wearing their headphones and everything. But for me personally, I use music as a way to amp myself up, to kind of get raise my energy levels for a match or a practice session or whatever it may be. But kind of reading through the video that you had posted, it kind of seemed like it could have a dual effect, that there could be the effect of amping up your energy levels, but also more of a way of regulating them and maybe stabilizing them a bit more.
Right.
How did you kind of get involved in that field of research, I guess, or what are your current practices of using music to help regulate arousal?
Music is, that comes probably more of a personal interest. I had, it was Peter Terry, I think, who was the one who actually introduced me to it. He has a guy, Costas, who is really into it. That was some years ago. He came to Leipzig when I was working as a doctoral student there. And just really fascinating stuff. And it just happened to be that I'm just have a small obsession, let's say, with music. I don't really not listen to music. Like the only reason I'm not listening to music right now is because we're having this conversation. Even joke in my office that like there's always music playing, and the other joke is that they don't know if it's going to be 90s hip hop or it's going to be some country music, because every now and then I got a hankering for that.
Right.
And then every now and then, Katy Perry comes on. It just depends what I'm in the
You
mood.
never know. You never know. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And sometimes you gotta listen to some Katy Perry. It just happens. But I think I think that speaks exactly to how I use as music with my athletes as well. Is I have this complete wide set amount of music. For example, when I do visualizations with players, I always put lo-fi hip hop on. It's fantastic. They love it way more than like a Zen Buddhist kind of meditation music. It gives them, I think they honestly have almost a negative affect to that at this point, because it's like, okay, here comes the psychologist, and now we're going to do meditation. For others, of course, it works, but for the way that I kind of am in my energy, the hip hop fits me much better. And when I do guided meditation or guided visualization, it's definitely a way that I like to use the music. And then of course I tell the athlete, I send him the Spotify playlist, or I send him that song, and I say, hey, before in a match, if you want to, because I have a couple of guys that get a little too amped up, and they just need to stay more focused. So I say, put on the lo-fi hip hop, go through the meditations, go through the visualizations that we've done in the office, and you'll find yourself back in that place real quickly. That's why music is so fantastic, as the memories and the emotions that get attached to it. That's why it has such a massive effect on our heart rate, on our breathing rate. Immediately has an immediate physiological effect. So if you can kind of tap into that, our system, use the system for you as opposed to against you. This is not to jump ship from what we're talking about, but you talked about ACT. ACT is my absolute go-to when I, it's technically, of course, a therapy, but with the athletes, I think it is, and coaches both, it is so easy for them to understand. Ironic. I think it's better. I think it's much easier than actual, I say, like psychological skills training, like trying to stop thoughts and things like that. And so being in the moment and kind of accepting these emotions that you have, and the music, what the music gives you for emotions, using what your body has, accepting that your body is excited or that's relaxed, I think is a real eye opener for a lot of players and a lot of coaches. They like it. They don't know they like it, and then you kind of combine it with a good song, and suddenly it's way more interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you kind of a little bit alluded to music kind of having like a conditional effect on people's thoughts or behaviors or whatever, in the sense that when you're doing certain mental processes in your office or wherever it may be, and you pair it with music, a certain playlist or a certain song, and then you go and give them that playlist or song, it almost kind of brings back that visualization or those certain behaviors or whatever it may be. There's some association between music and some physiological response by the athlete or whoever. I mean, it could be anybody.
It's Pavlov's athlete. That's all it is.
That's right, Pavlov's. Yeah.
That's all it is. It's simpler than it seems sometimes. I think we don't complicate things, but it's usually not. Often it's simpler than we psychologists try to make it be.
That's right. Yeah, it's you kind of take that parsimonious approach to it, where the simplest response might be the right response, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you can also be completely wrong, but
right. You might as well start there.
Again, talking about ACT, I think I had a really interesting seminar. I don't know if we have time, but this is something I think you would appreciate. We had a seminar and we talked about this. I'm assuming if you use ACT, Harris, and he talks about. I like his book ACT Big Simple because it helps me translate a lot of what I'm trying to say. And, he talks about this thing called the choice point, and people kept asking questions like, okay, well, which one is right and which one is wrong? And I kept trying to explain, like, you're missing the point. You're missing the choice point in this sense, but you're missing what I'm trying to. It's not about right or wrong. It's literally about I'm going towards my values, things that I find important. I'm going away, but we're not trying to accuse or trying to judge anything of being right or wrong. It's just I make these decisions to which direction I want to go with my behavior, and I think that's something. I'm trying to break down a complicated thought process into a very simple, white or black choice, or black and white choice. And even then, it's still, I don't want to say too complicated because they did understand, but simple is better. The more simple you can break anything down. And sometimes, we would joke now, unconsciously maybe conditioning somebody to have a certain emotional reaction or calmness to music can definitely help. I don't know. That's again, I'm joking a little bit. You never want to, you don't want to manipulate or condition anybody. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But I think I think music is an absolute weapon, and people should definitely consciously use it to help them perform better.
Yeah. And I'm going to put a little tidbit in here for those that aren't familiar with ACT. I know that we know what ACT is, and we talked about a bit off before we started recording. But for those that are interested in ACT, it's called acceptance and commitment therapy, or it's also, I think there's acceptance and commitment training. I think one is for psychopathic diagnoses, and one is for non-psychopathic. But it's I would call it kind of a mix of psychological and behavior change strategies where you're really focusing on people, in the name, accepting certain feelings and, certain feelings of anxiety or depression, like feelings, whatever it may be. And then really just working with them to not avoid those situations, but to learn how to manage their behavior or their thought processes when they encounter those situations. A lot of times, I read a description of certain strategies, things like ACT, and I feel like it's things that some people already kind of do, but it just kind of puts that scientific term on it. So I always find that a little bit interesting when I read about different strategies.
Yeah, I had a seminar recently where I was explaining I was talking about Henrikson's research in environments, and I was telling the certain points of what are the traits of effective environments, and we were kind of laughing because there's like these scientific kind of terms for each trait, but they have absolute layman term names. I mean, you can call it something else. It's not like one was called integration of efforts, and it's just like, well, people work towards the same goal. Like, it's
right.
It's not actually that complicated. It sounds maybe like tries to sound sometimes fancier than it really is. Except you're exactly right with acceptance and commitment therapy. It's just basically understand that you're a human being and commit to a behavior that is in a good relationship to your values. That basically is it. And when you said, when you break it down for people, a lot of times they're like, okay, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah. That was a big thing that I kind of found out of through my own education, which was through applied behavior analysis, or ABA. And really the best way to break it down is you reinforce behaviors that you want to happen more, and you don't reinforce behaviors that you want to happen less. And I was like, Oh, seems pretty simple. But then there's always the kind of scientific terms that are attached to it. But that's just one thing that I wanted to point out, because I think maybe for some people, I don't want to generalize too much here, but for some people, they may see some scientific terms or for some certain strategies or therapies or whatever it may be, and they might get put off by it or maybe taken aback by maybe how complicated the language seems. But if you really have somebody to break it down for you in layman's terms, or you do your own bit of kind of digging to find out what it means in layman's terms, it's mostly things that we're already kind of doing already for some people. It just has this kind of, I guess, technical language aspect of it.
Right.
Yeah. Anyways, Peter, I got to get going now to work, but I really appreciate you taking the time I guess, again, this afternoon for you, but morning for myself, but for coming on and sharing your experiences in sports psychology, as well as kind of some of the things that you're doing right now to help out athletes and coaches. And I think it was really important to have that discussion about culture, because I always talk about culture in my day-to-day interactions with people, but it's such a huge, important piece to a sports team, because you can have all the talent in the world, I feel like, but if you don't have the right culture, then you're really kind of not living up to your true potential as an athlete and as a team.
Yeah, I would sign everything you just said. I would put it in dossier and sign it. Sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys, again for checking out this episode. If you enjoyed any part of it, please share it with your friends and family, and I'll speak to you next time.